The context in which gay men become initially HIV infected is very complex and hasn't really been properly studied. Many clinicians and researchers say that a lot of infections in gay men occur because of depression, anxiety, a sense of inevitability. And I think there's enormous truth in that. But also I've known gay men, more gay men becoming infected with HIV while partying. They weren't unhappy, they were partying, they were having a great time. They were on acid in San Francisco, they were on ketamine in Los Angeles, they were on crystal meth in London. They weren't having a bad time, they weren't depressed, they were partying. And because the drugs made them unconscious, in that context, they didn't think about the next minute, leave alone the next day or the next year or next decade. But somewhere before that happened, somewhere in their mind, becoming HIV infected wasn't problematic. So it wasn't as if they went into the party mode thinking we need to be careful because if we get out of our faces, this is going to happen, and it will happen if you haven't made plans before how you're going to protect yourself. So I feel the clearest answer I can give is anxiety, depression, partying, wanting to join a club that everyone else is a member of. Because once you're HIV infected, the other shoe has dropped. Nothing worse can happen to you. The worst that can happen has happened. You become HIV positive. Okay, you can get syphilis and whatever else, hepatitis, but HIV is the big one, the big H, the big A, AIDS. So the worst that can happen to you has happened. You can relax, both shoes are on the floor, you've dropped the other shoe. Inevitability syndrome, I call it, because nothing else can happen to you because the worst has already happened. And I feel a lot of gay men getting infected now are very relaxed about it because they haven't got to worry about becoming HIV positive because, hey, they became HIV positive, so what's to worry about? I can understand that, but what it says about them and our communities, our gay communities, is that all there is? Is that all there is to it? That becoming HIV positive is the zenith, the nadir of our lives? I don't think we have created communities worth living in. We went straight from sexual liberation in the 60s to the AIDS wards of the late 70s and 80s. We had a very short time of liberation, but in that time of liberation, we discovered drugs, we discovered the type of sex that a human being cannot sustain over a long period. And what is forgotten, and if you study the data in America, which is where the best data comes from, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, the HIV epidemic is paralleled by the explosion of recreational drugs. They happened at the same time together. And in a way, they sort of flawed each other because you couldn't tease out one from the other, because I don't know a single gay man who became HIV positive in those cities or at that time who wasn't also a very heavy drug user. I recommend everyone who's watching this to read Larry Kramer's book Faggots, which is where he put it very well and for which he got crucified, and also Randy Schultz and the band played on. And if you can bear to watch it, Longtime Companion. And these tell the story of how it began. And because we have no sense of history, we're a very young community, we need to know where we came from, because there's the answer to where it went wrong. When I ran the embassy in heaven, the gay men I know who became HIV infected, then later developed AIDS and died, were very heavily into certain drugs. Cocaine, the biggest killer of all was poppers. In fact, I my charity went to court in this country with the Royal Pharmaceutical Society and got amyl nitrate and amyl nitrate banned. But unfortunately, because the Royal Pharmaceutical didn't get the whole family of poppers banned, which is the alkyl nitrate family, you could still buy butyl and N-isobutyl nitrate. These drugs are described by the co-discoverer of HIV, Dr. Robert Gallo, as a primary cause of AIDS in HIV positive gay men. They deplete glutathione, they cause T-cell depletion, the classical signs of AIDS progression. So then we worked with the Medicines Control Agency at the Department of Health and worked with them over many years in a multi-million-pound case to get butyl and N-isobutyl banned. And unfortunately, we lost the case and they were not banned. And the case was lost in an interesting technicality by saying, well, if you're going to ban these drugs, you may as well ban anything that has an impact on the human body, such as tea and coffee. Very convoluted argument. Technically, they were correct, but these drugs are not taken by the general population. Gay men are exposed to very specific drugs. Poppers is almost unique to gay men. I'm not saying it's the cause of AIDS, but as Robert Gallo says, it's a major cause of progression. So cocaine, poppers, ecstasy is a disinhibitor. The biggest killer today, I would say, apart from poppers, is crystal meth. Anyone taking crystal meth, I hope you made your will, because you aren't going to survive. You are going to get very seriously ill and die. Talk about depression, anxiety, crystal meth. Talk about suicidal tendency, crystal meth. So you can't tease out the strands of recreational drug abuse and misuse from HIV. They go together. You can't remove one strand from the other. It's almost the same strand. So I would say that if we look at where we came from, it's a sign to where we're going. And we are recreating the same conditions that created the AIDS epidemic, HIV epidemic in the first place, except 25 years later. We haven't learned a thing. Stop the drugs, stop the unsafe sex, if you want to live. If you don't want to live, continue. But don't expect sympathy or empathy or funding, or maybe even clinical care soon. You take responsibility, caveat emptor.